GoForThe2.com in with the Week 1 college football predictions. Doesn't get better than this. A full slate of action from Thursday straight through the holiday Monday night with Clemson and Georgia Tech. I mean, about 50-plus games, 60-plus games on tap. We're going to be watching them from start to finish, so stay with us all season long on GoForThe2.com. Week 0 did not disappoint. We had an upset in Dublin. We had Northwestern and Patty Fitzgerald stepping up and winning the ball game outright. 31-28. They trailed in the third quarter, 28-17. You talk about Scott Frost going for the kill shot. It fails. Ryan Helinski on the ensuing drive leads the team on a touchdown, cuts the deficit 28-24, and Northwestern never looks back en route to the 31-28 come from behind win. Scott Frost is searching for answers, blaming Mark Whipple. Has nobody to blame but himself in that ballgame. You look at halftime adjustments and in-game adjustments. Credit Pat Fitzgerald and that defensive staff. They held Nebraska from 7:53 in the third quarter to the end of the game to 85 total yards, held Casey Thompson to only 6 of 13 pass completions, 46%, and more importantly, held Nebraska 0 of 5 on third down conversions. They were able to get off the field, give the football back to Ryan Helinski with short fields, and he didn't disappoint throwing for over 310 yards. I think he finished with 314 in that ball game. He outdueled Casey Thompson in the second half of that matchup, and Northwestern moves to 1-0 on the year, and more importantly, picks up a big Big Ten win there. They're headed in the right direction for week number 2. We'll see if Nebraska can get off the mat. They face an FCS opponent in week 2 and then battle back in week number 3. A lot of pressure on Frost. Will he be fired? Only time will tell. Nebraska has not been to a bowl game since 2016 Music City Bowl with Mike Riley, where Nebraska lost to Tennessee. So we'll see how it plays out for both of these teams the rest of the way. If you want all of the college football action, tune into SportsGrid.com, SportsGrid Radio, and Sirius Channel 159, Sirius XM Channel 159 every night, 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern. Carver and Lisi, Mike and I go through every game on the college and NFL slate. We give you best bets. We got you covered Monday through Friday. Any breakdowns, you can call in on the show, ask your questions. We cover it all every single night, 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern. And then the kickoff show, Saturday, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern, College Football Today. It's myself, Ben Stevens, Kevin Walsh. We break it down for 3 hours. Sirius Channel 159, SportsGrid.com on the TV end. We have complete wall-to-wall coverage, game props, best bets, you name it, we have you covered for kickoff this coming weekend, Saturday, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern, Sirius Channel 159 and SportsGrid.com. Let's jump right into the Week 1 slate and predictions. Only about 5 selections on this video. If you want the rest, tune into the radio show and then obviously College Football Today on Saturday morning. Let's jump into the battle in Coastal Carolina. We've seen some line movement in this game already. Coastal opened about 2 months ago as a 4-point favorite. They've bet it down already to 2.5 points. A lot of money coming in on Army right now. We know about Army in the triple option. A lot different in practice than it is in game speed. Very difficult matchup. Army had one of the most prolific rushing attacks in all of college football. Top 10 in the nation last year, and it's going to be very difficult for Coastal in this matchup. Only has 2 starters coming back, but I think Coastal can get it done. I'll tell you a couple of reasons why I favor Coastal Carolina in this matchup. Let's first look at the Army defense. Last year and the past couple of years, this hasn't been as lethal as a defense as they were about 3 years ago. Third down conversions is a cause of concern for Army. They allowed opposing offenses to convert right in the area of about 41% of their third down opportunities. That's important going up against Coastal's offense with Grayson McCall, their trigger man. That's one of the most accurate and prolific quarterbacks, not just in the Sun Belt, but in all of college football. Grayson McCall last year, 73% completion percentage, 27 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. This is a Coastal Carolina offense that was very balanced. They rushed for 228 yards on the ground, 265 through the air, and converted 53% of their third down opportunities. There is some inexperience in terms of the wide out position, but they do get Pinckney. He's a Georgia State transfer. Have some other players that have game experience, just not elite game experience heading into this ball game. But I still feel that Coastal has a speed advantage heading into this ball game. Let's also look at the fact that every time Coastal runs the football effectively, they win ball games. They were 9-1 last year. Every time they pounded the rock for over 200 yards, they won those 8 FBS games by an average margin of victory of 24.7 points per game. They were 9-1, but also faced FCS opponent Citadel, beat them up really bad, so I don't include that in terms of the margin of victory. They beat the 8 FBS opponents by 24.7 points per game. I think this game is going to resemble the matchup last year against Sam Hartman and Wake Forest. Same type of offensive attack, very physical offensive line in Wake Forest. Same type of mentality with Coastal Carolina. They bring back 3 starters. They want to run the football, but they have an athletic quarterback and an accurate quarterback that can challenge Army secondary over the top. You look at Hartman last year, had great success throwing for 458 yards on that secondary, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. I expect the same type of offensive game plan and philosophy. Look for Coastal to challenge Army over the top, jump out to a big lead, get them out of their game plan, and force them to become one-dimensional. I think Coastal does hold a significant offensive advantage in this ballgame. On the defensive side of the ball for Coastal, Gerard Clark, their defensive nose tackle, is the main X factor in this ballgame. Him and Lance Boykin are the 2 starters that return. Lance Boykin, the cornerback, is an all Sun Belt selection. Gerard Clark is 340, goes about 6'4", but he's a big body. He's going to force double teams. He could disrupt the timing of Army's offense in terms of the zone blocking. That's the biggest thing. You have a big physical nose tackle that forces double teams. You get that push up front. That allows those linebackers to fill running lanes. And even though they have 2 starters coming back, Coastal does have speed that can run sideline to sideline with Army. I think that's the difference. I think they force Army into predictable third downs. Look for that secondary led by Boykin to step up. And I think Coastal makes a statement and wins this ball game convincingly by 14 points or more. Playing at home, this line's already down about 1.5 points. I think Coastal wins by double digits in this matchup. Another battle takes place in Tuscaloosa. Top-ranked Alabama taking on Utah State. Utah State struggled out of the gate last week against UConn. They allowed UConn to rush for 245 yards on their front 7. They built a 14-0 first half lead before Logan Bonner stepped up. He led the comeback. He completed 20 of 29 passes, 281 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. You talk about the success of UConn, though. That was their first game where they rushed for over 200 in 16 games. You have to go back to 2019 against UMass, where they pounded the rock for 326. That's how good of an effort UConn put up against Utah State's front 7 in that matchup, and that's a cause of concern, obviously, going up against a very big physical offensive line in Alabama. Now, the trends favor Alabama. You look at Alabama, they have not lost a Week 1 matchup since 2001. They've won 21 straight games by an average margin of victory of 26 points per game. Last loss, Week 1 for Alabama, came in 2001 to UCLA in Tuscaloosa. More importantly, since 2016, you look at Alabama, they are 39-1 straight up at home in Bryant-Denny. They have won those 39 games against FCS and FBS opponents by an average margin of victory of 33.9 points per game. They were 7-0 at home last year, won those games by 28.7 points per game. So all eyes and all trends are pointed to Alabama. I think there's no doubt that Alabama wins this ballgame. Now, this line opened up at 38.5, and they immediately jumped it up over 41.5. It's now 41.5, 42 in most books in New Jersey and on the West Coast. But You look at week number 2. We know Alabama goes on the road to face Steve Sarkisian in Texas. So are they going to want to just dominate this ball game, keep the starters in there in the second half? I'm not so sure. I think they maybe go build a lead, and same thing that Utah State did in week number 1 against UConn. They go a little bit vanilla. That's not taken away from Bryce Young. We know that he's a Heisman Trophy candidate. He's got Jahmyr Gibbs, 47 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Will Anderson, Heisman Trophy candidate, and Jordan Battle in the secondary. But this is still a Utah State team that's a much better road team than they are a home team. They were 8-0 last year on the road or on a neutral field site. They beat teams like Air Force, they beat San Jose State, they beat Washington State, they beat San Diego State and Oregon State, all away from home, so they can step up. I think there's no doubt Alabama wins, but you're getting basically from the 26 points that they've won on week 1, you're getting about 15.5 points of value, and you're getting about 8 points of value if you just take the 39-1 record that they've won close to 34 points per game. You're getting an extra touchdown and a half and a hook. So I'll take my chances. I like Utah State to keep this game close and be within the 41 point number Saturday night against Tuscaloosa. We'll see how it plays out for Nick Saban and the crew. Let's turn our attention to the matchup in Atlanta. Now, Pac-12 SEC battle. Again, we saw Oregon get absolutely abused in back-to-back games by Utah, and more importantly in the bowl game where they had a lot of opt-outs. Kennedy Brooks is still running on that defense. Oklahoma pounded the rock for 322 yards on that front seven. Kayvon Thibodeau did not play. We know he moved on to the NFL, became a top-ranked draft pick for the New York Giants. You look at just overall, Dan Lanning, former defensive coordinator for Georgia, national champion, led that top-ranked Georgia defense. Now as the head coach at Oregon, we saw the same type of situation about 2 or 3 years ago when Sam Pittman took over Arkansas. They opened up week 1 at home in Fayetteville against DeJuan Mathis in Georgia. The line opened up at 29.5. They bet it down to 26.5, and it was a 12-7 first half lead for the Georgia Bulldogs before they pulled away in the second half of this matchup. But we know about 15 players moving on to the NFL for Georgia. We know 6 defensive starters have moved on, including Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, Trayvon Walker, and the list goes on and on and on. We know about James Cook and Zamir White and obviously Pickens that have moved on and are making dividends in the NFL. But the one thing that Kirby Smart has done and built this team is in the interior. Offense and defensive lines are unlike any other in the SEC East, and they rival Alabama. That's the one thing Kirby Smart has done in terms of his tenure in Athens. He recruits big uglies that can run the football effectively and shut down the run, and that's where this game is going to be won or lost. You look at just in back-to-back games against Utah, Oregon's defense failed to step up. They allowed 158 rushing yards per game last year, over 4 yards per carry in both losses to Utah, and 7.4 yards per carry in the loss to Oklahoma. You look at Georgia, since 2016, Georgia, an amazing 37-0 every time they pound the rock for over 200 yards. They were 6-0 in those games last year and won those games by an average margin of victory of 40.1 points per game. You look at just the road perspective, Oregon since 2016, they're 15-22 on the road or on a neutral field site. That's a 405 winning percentage. Granted, they stepped up against C.J. Stroud and Ohio State as a 14.5-point dog, won the ball game outright, but then lost 3 games down the stretch to Utah, all on the road, right? Salt Lake, neutral site, and then to Oklahoma as well. So they did not step up in their last 3 road appearances. You look at the flip side for Georgia since 2018, 2017, on the road or on the neutral field under Kirby Smart, 23-7 overall. Stetson Bennett, I think, will play well within the system. I think they're going to be able to run the football, stay in manageable third down situations. I look for Brock Bowers to step up. I know this line opened up at 14.5. They have betted up over the critical number of 17. It doesn't matter to me. I think Georgia's the superior team playing at home, defending national champions. I think they look to make a statement. I think Georgia wins this ball game by 24 points or more over the Oregon Ducks. Another top 10 battle takes place in Columbus. We have Ohio State taking on Notre Dame. Now, Marcus Freeman did not step up in his first coaching game against Oklahoma State. He held a 28-7 first half lead, did not make adjustments. Mike Gundy and the crew pulled that ball game out and win. They were a 2.5-point underdog in that favored in that battle and covered against Marcus Freeman. But you saw this line in the offseason open at 10.5 for Ohio State and immediately got bet up over 14. Then it got bet up to 15.5. And then all of a sudden, they just steamrolled it over 17. It's now 17.5 in New Jersey and on the West Coast. And I understand the factors about why money and why people are back in Ohio State. Let's look at the offensive perspective. C.J. Stroud, 44 touchdowns, only 7 interceptions last year, stepped up, made definite progression after that loss early on in the year to Oregon. He played very well within the scheme, has 2 of the top wide receivers in the game that are going to challenge Notre Dame's defense over the top. Travion Henderson as well. They get a benefit in terms of having Oklahoma State defensive coordinator Jim Knowles come over. That was the Achilles heel for Ohio State, right? Early part of the season, they cannot shut down the run effectively. That's why they lost to Oregon. C.J. Verdell and Travis Dye rushed for $167 on that front seven, and that's what Notre Dame's going to have to do. Now, when you just look at the spread perspective and just look at the trends for Ohio State, they are 29-2 since 2017 at home in Columbus. Only 2 losses since 2017 have come to Oregon last year and in 2017 to Baker Mayfield. You look at their margin of victory in terms of those games, 29 games at home against FCS and FBS opponents. They have dominated by 30 points per game. You look at last year, they were 6-1 at home in Columbus, won by 30 plus per game. They just don't lose and they dominate against inferior opponents. But Notre Dame is a pretty good road team. The last 3 years under Brian Kelly, they are 13-5 on the road or on a neutral field site. They were 5-1 last year. They were 13-5 on the road, have won those games by an average margin of victory of 20.9 points per game. 5-1 last year on the road. They won those by 18.4 points per game. They have 4 starters coming back on the offensive line. Michael Mayer's there. Avery Davis is out of this matchup, but I don't think it matters. I think you give Marcus Freeman 6 months of preparation. He's going to come up, in my opinion, with a game plan to at least neutralize C.J. Stroud in that offense. Now, we're not asking him to win the ball game outright. We're asking him to slow down Ohio State enough to keep it well within the 17.5-point number. How do you do that? You run the football effectively, you sustain drives, and you keep C.J. Stroud on the sidelines. I think they're able to do that with Buckner. They have 4 offensive line starters coming back. I think if they start fast, whether it be a field goal or a touchdown, now you could play more zone coverage going up against those wide receivers and force Stroud to read coverage and methodically work down the field. Get him into long third downs, dial up some blitz packages, and maybe have a shot to force a turnover and be within this matchup. I know all the numbers suggest that you should be back in Ohio State, but in a week 1 matchup with a defensive-minded head coach and 6 months of preparation and bulletin board material, I'm taking Notre Dame plus the 17.5 in this matchup. Again, I know from a speed perspective, it favors Ohio State, but from a defensive perspective, I think Marcus Freeman is good enough to neutralize Ryan Day's offense enough to keep it within the number, and I think it's under the 58.5 as well, but I think the better play is taking Notre Dame plus the 17.5 points in this ballgame. Last ballgame on the docket is an intriguing one. It takes place in South Florida. If you listen to the show all last year, I was on Jeff Scott and South Florida in this ballgame. They were catching 18.5 points to BYU. Now, BYU jumped out to an early first half lead. Freshman quarterback Timian McLean led the comeback. They were able to pound the rock for about $174 on the front seven of BYU. Had the football with about 2 minutes left and couldn't get the victory. They wound up losing that ball game by 6 points on the road in Provo. Now BYU and Jaron Hall come back to Tampa. It's going to be very humid. I think that could be a factor in this ball game. You look at BYU's last 2 games of the regular season, they allowed over 200 yards. Gary Bohannon, the former Baylor quarterback, takes over for Timmy McClain. He's an experienced quarterback. I think Jeff Scott is building something here. I know from a record perspective it doesn't look it, but they played some of the better teams on their schedule, like Cincinnati. They covered. They went toe-to-toe with Houston, played a very difficult ball game. Two of the top teams in the AAC. They lost by 12. Went toe-to-toe with UCF, covered that game as well at the end of the year. Their arch rival. They're catching 12 points at home. I don't know if they win, but I think South Florida definitely covers the 12-point number Saturday afternoon against BYU. It's a 4 o'clock kick. I like Jaron Hall. I like the physicality of BYU, but I do feel that South Florida and Jeff Scott hold a significant speed advantage on the perimeter. We're just getting started. Follow me all season long. GoForThe2.com. Have a great week, everyone. I'll see you on Saturday.